Hello everybody and welcome to Decoding the WSL, the podcast dedicated to the stats and facts in the WSL. We're getting through the WSL previews and today we're on to another two teams. It is Leicester and Man City. We're going to have a look at how they got on last season, what's changed over the summer, and I'm going to make some predictions of how I think next season will go. I'm your host, Sam Biccarino. Yes, here we are with another WSL preview. Today, like I said, we're looking at the Foxes, Leicester and Man City as well. Now, you may have seen on social media, both from myself and the YOAC podcast, that they were supposed to be on today's show. We did actually record that, but due to some technical difficulties, the recording was lost. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to re-record. We did try to find some time to re-record the episode, but Charlie and Matt from the YOAC podcast have very selfishly decided to go and get married instead. I know they need to get their priorities straight, as I'm sure you'll agree. No, I'm joking, of course. Congratulations to them. I hope that everything goes very well, and I'll definitely have them back on the pod at some point later down the line as a married couple. That does mean that today it is just me and you, listener, and we will get to Man City in a bit, but we're going to start off with Leicester. So let's start off just by having a look. Last year, they finished 10th in the WSL. They were 12 points off relegation, 13 points off the top half. So with sort of 3 or 4 matches to go, it had already been confirmed that they were going to be finishing in the bottom half, a comfortable bottom half finish. Outside of the league, they did have a good season in the domestic cup. So Conti Cup, they didn't get too far, but the FA Cup was the one where they really hit some heights, getting to the FA Cup semi-final, which was a fantastic achievement for Leicester and one that they'll hope to repeat in the future, of course. A negative for them last year was obviously the instability they had within their coaching setup. Willie Kirk was removed from his position as first team coach, with his assistant stepping up for the rest of the season, but that has now changed as we go into the next season. So fingers crossed there'll be a bit more stability for them and they'll have a bit more success under the new manager. But that leads us on quite nicely to start talking about the changes within the squad over the summer. There were quite a few players leaving the club, more than I seem to remember as and when the announcements came out. Captain Aileen Whelan has retired, so obviously she's left the club. Amy Palmer has gone to Southampton on a free. Demi Lambourne has gone to Sunderland. Josie Green joins WSL newbies Crystal Palace. Remy Simpson has gone to Kristianstad. Monique Robinson got to the end of her contract. And Ava Baker has gone to Birmingham. I think throughout those names, there's not a load of surprises. I think Amy Palmer and Josie Green especially still had something to give carrying on from last season and, you know, we're still WSL quality players. But the biggest loss I think for Leicester this season is going to be Ava Baker. She's not someone that had a load of minutes last year, but she's a youngster that come through the academy. I saw her play at the King Power against Chelsea for sort of the last few minutes of the game, and I thought her tenacity and all-round work ethic were really good. She's a really promising forward, and Leicester have let her go. She'll obviously get much more pitch time at Birmingham. She'll be more of a first-team player there regularly, and that will be good for her development. I'm surprised Leicester didn't want to let her go on a loan only rather than selling her, because I think in a few years' time she will be a very good player and WSL level player. But as we'll get to in a moment, they probably do have some players come in that might actually fill that void, both short-term and long-term. The big signing they've had this summer is obviously their new manager, Amandine Miquel, who joins from Stattorino. She took over from the French side when they were in a similar position to Leicester City within the French league. Is a big advocate for slow and steady growth of the club, and you can see that was her philosophy, and that was something that she was very good at because she actually got Rem up to 4th in the French league last season. Similar to the WSL, there's a bit of a gap between top 3 and everyone else. They've got PSG, they've got Lyon, and they've got Paris FC. But to then be best of the rest, I think shows that she's a manager that's going to get the most out of the players that she has at the club, which is ideal for a team like Leicester. And also they will hope that they can replicate what they've done in France, being a lower half side and then within a couple of years being one of those teams that can finish 4th. In terms of players that have come in, there's Chantal Swaby, who's come in from Fleury. She's a 25-year-old midfielder. She was born in Connecticut in America, but represents Jamaica. Older sister is also a professional footballer that plays AC Milan, and she's had a few starts in the pre-season friendlies, so I'd expect her to potentially be a starting centre-back. There's also Sari Keys, who has joined from OH Leuven. She's a 23-year-old Belgian defender. A very interesting signing is Ruby Mace that has come in from Man City. She made 11 appearances on loan for Leicester in the 22-23 season. Former player of Arsenal, and obviously she's come over from Man City now at two big clubs and not really being able to break through. I think coming to Leicester this season will be really good for her, and she could end up being one of those players that starts regularly in the WSL, and that will only help her career. If Leicester end up improving as a team, she could be someone that's here for a long time, but if not, she'll almost certainly be using Leicester as a stepping stone to go on to sort of bigger and better things. Finally, the last two transfers that Leicester brought in have come over with Amandine from her former club in France. They are Shana Chosanotti, who is a 19-year-old winger. She's a French youth international. But the exciting one is Naomi Mouchon. She's a 21-year-old French striker. And I've seen a bit of her in the pre-season stuff that they played in Australia, and she looks brilliant. She's a very powerful, both in terms of strength, but also in terms of speed player. She reminds me of Mayra Ramirez, that type of player, probably not quite of the same reputation and caliber, but could potentially become that good. She's only 21 at the moment. She was the top scorer in the French league last season that didn't play for Lyon or PSG. So, in that best of the rest sort of thing that Amandine was very good at, she's then got a striker that can match that. I think it's quite a big coup for Leicester, probably a player that the big teams weren't really looking for, but anyone else underneath though, outside of the Man City, the Chelsea, the Arsenal, they'd have been looking at a player like this. So for her to come to Leicester will be really good for them this season. And I think we could see her netting quite a few goals and causing a lot of defenders a lot of hassle. As for other talking points around Leicester, Denny Draper has signed her first professional contract. That'll undoubtedly be good news for the fans. She seems to be banging the goals for the under-21s. I don't believe she went on the pre-season tour to Australia, so I can't imagine she's going to be a first-team player this season, especially with Mouchon coming in as well in her position. But she's definitely one for the future. She's come up through the club, so it's really good that they've kept her on. Another player that has signed permanently for Leicester now after being on loan last season was Asmita Ale. The left back will be looking like she's going to start this season as well, with Janice Cayman dropping down to the bench. So she's a really solid option to have in for Leicester and one that will help them this season. There were some rumours that Lisa Kopp would be moving to Man United. Obviously, that never materialised. It's now past the transfer window deadline, so that's not going to be happening at least until January, if not after, or if not never. I'm intrigued whether that means that Lisa Kopp is now going to be Leicester's number one. She seems to have shared the minutes with Leipzig in pre-season, but it seems like a strange move to keep her in as a player that's probably good enough to start for a WSL side. She's the Netherlands' number 2 keeper and has been playing while Daphne van Domselaar has been injured. So does that mean she's going to overtake Leipzig? Leipzig is now looking like she wants to have a push to become the Germany number 1 keeper. So both of them are going to be fighting hard to take that number 1 spot. And I wouldn't be surprised to see one of them leaving in January, especially if either Kopp or Leipzig nails down their number 1 place. The other one is probably going to be wanting to play week in, week out. So may look to move, but if you're a Leicester fan, you probably want to keep them both because having 2 number 1s that are of the quality to play in the first team is ideal. From a fan's perspective anyway, from a manager, from a player, it's a lot more complex. It's a lot harder to manage that, but we'll just have to see how that plays out. And finally, after a lot of injuries last season, it seems that Hannah Kane and Shannon O'Brien will hopefully be back in the squad and playing for the majority of this season. Hannah Kane, I believe, is back to fitness already. Shannon O'Brien is looking like she might miss the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, but from then on, she'll be back in the squad. And I think her especially, Shannon O'Brien, will be a really good addition to the side. Leicester are looking like they're probably going to start with Missy Goodwin and Jutta Rantala on the wings, but Shannon O'Brien is such a good option that I think she may either encourage Amandine to change her lineup slightly in terms of players in positions, but actually potentially also to change her formation to fit a player like Shannon O'Brien in to get the most out of what they want for the team. Again, we'll have to wait and see a few weeks. We'll have to wait and see once they're back to full fitness, but that could be something we see as the season goes on. Just before I get to my expectations for the coming season, I did have a question from social media for this. So this one is from Sarah on X. She says, it might already be on the cards, but what is Amandine's starting 11 against Liverpool in the first game? Pre-season, in my opinion, has given a selection headache. A good thing, of course. And it's a really good question, Sarah. Thank you. We discussed this when I recorded initially with the YYC podcast. Myself and Charlie came up with almost exactly the same team. The only difference being that our keepers were different. So I went for Janina Leipzig in goal. That is what I think will happen. Whereas she said that she thinks it'll be Lisa Kopp. I can understand both sides. Wouldn't be surprised either way. That was probably one of the ones in my squad that I really wouldn't be surprised if I got it wrong. And then the rest of the 10 players, we got exactly the same. So we had Ali at left back, Bott at right back, and then a centre back partnership of Chantal Swaby, who will definitely be in there, and probably Sophie Howard. In terms of preseason minutes, it's been quite close between Sophie Howard and Julie Thibault. I think both fantastic. They'll probably get used in different ways throughout the season. Sophie Howard is much better in the air. So against a team like Liverpool that have got people like Sophie Roman Haug and tried to win lots of aerial duels, I think you're much more likely to start Sophie Howard. So that's the 4 at the back. And then I think it'll be a 4-2-3-1 formation. So the 2 holding midfielders, we've gone for Ruby Mace, who seems to be in favour for Mikel. And I think she's going to be partnered by Sam Tierney. It was close between Tierney and Takarada. Takarada's also got a few minutes in pre-season, but I think with Sam Tierney being the captain now, she's had over 100 caps for Leicester, etc. I think she's going to be a solid option, is probably going to play more often than Takarada. The wide players, I think, will be Jutta Rantala and Missy Goodwin. They seem to be the players that are playing in pre-season. Jutta Rantala is one of Leicester's best players. It's unsurprising that she's going to start. And then Missy Goodwin's been getting a couple of starts in pre-season. She looks like she's finally ending her trend of seasons where she is mostly used as a substitute, and she's actually maybe going to start starting games more often. That is a position where I think Shannon O'Brien might come in once she's back to full fitness. But if Missy Goodwin has a good start and things are going well for Leicester, it might be a case of if it's not broken, don't fix it, and Goodwin keeps her place. We'll just have to see how that pans out. After that, the central player I think is going to be Yuka Mimiki. Emilia Pelganda has had some minutes in pre-season in that position, but I think Mimiki is going to be the one that takes it, and she'll be playing just off the shoulder of Naomi Mouchon, who, like I said earlier, is that 21-year-old French striker. She's looked really good in pre-season, has come over with Amandine Mikel from Stattorino. I'd be surprised if she is not the starting centre forward this season. So that's the 11 that I think Leicester will start with at the start of the season, that first game against Liverpool. But as we move on to the rest of the season and the expectations, I don't think they're going to have the same success they had in the domestic leagues as last season. They obviously did very, very well getting to the FA Cup semi-final, made history at the club. I think as much as that's a fantastic thing to happen, it's not something that you're expecting to happen all the time. And unfortunately, I don't think this season is one where they're going to get to that level again. In the WSL, I think they're going to improve on last season. They finished 10th then. I think the squad has got better. I think although other teams around them have also improved their squads, I think they've improved their squad by more, if that makes sense. So my prediction for them this season is 8th. I think it will be quite close, especially from that sort of 7th to 10th range. So wouldn't be surprised to see them finish slightly higher, maybe even above a team like Spurs, who have lost quite a lot of players. Or on the other hand, I could also see teams like Everton or Brighton finishing above Leicester. I think it'll all be quite close within there, but if I'm going to have to put a number on it, I'm going to say 8th place. I'd be very, very surprised if they finished below that 10th spot. If they're in a relegation battle, then I think that's something that a lot of people are going to find quite surprising. So yeah, that's my preview for Leicester. A lot of players out and in, some very low profile but high quality signings. And I think overall they will improve on last season, although not quite to the heights of, top half or even Champions League level qualification. But as I spoke about earlier, Amandine Mikel, she's very much an advocate for slow and steady growth of the club. So don't be surprised to see Leicester in the top half in 2 or 3 years' time. And, potentially one day pushing that top 4. And talking of the top 4, let's go and take a look at Man City. So Man City last season obviously finished 2nd in the WSL. They were only behind Chelsea on goal difference. It was very much in their hands. It was their title to win. Chelsea thought they'd lost it. Even Emma Hayes had said that she thought she'd lost it before the season had finished. And yet Chelsea, being the inevitable beast they are, managed to make the most of Man City's slip up and take the title. So that's how they got on last season. Let's take a look at what happened over the summer. And there are a few high-profile transfers out. Obviously, Ellie Roebuck has gone to Barcelona. I think this was very much a transfer that made sense. Barcelona were quite keen to have her. Keating had taken her number 1 spot. and by all accounts wasn't going to let that up. So Ellie Roebuck searching for a new challenge. Barcelona is a great place to go. I think the transfer just makes sense. Other players that have gone are Esme Morgan. She's gone off to Washington Spirit, made her debut last night as I record. Felipe Angeldal's gone to Real Madrid. I don't think she's going to be that much of a loss, especially when you've got players like Jill Roord coming back, and when we talk about some of the players that have come in. Demi Stokes has gone to Newcastle. We have already spoken about Ruby Mace going to Leicester, and Steph Horton has retired. So there's some good players in there, players that have gone out, but I think it's when we look at the players coming in that we realise that Man City are really going to be a force this season. The big transfer in is Viv Miedema, which is just a ridiculous signing. After seemingly not want to sign a new contract at Arsenal, she has gone on a free. And Man City are the team that picked her up. It was a bit of a question mark about where she would go. Would she stay in the UK? Obviously, Beth Mead, her girlfriend, is still in London at Arsenal. I think they live just outside. They've got a dog together, so it'd be a rogue move to move away. You can understand why she wants to stay in the country, but moving up to Man City is the decision for her, and it's where she's gone. My favourite Viv Miedema stat, and probably one of my favourite stats in football, that I will bring up every time Viv Miedema comes up in conversation, is that in the WSL, she has scored more goals for Arsenal than Arsenal have conceded while she's been on the pitch. So she has scored 79 goals for Arsenal in the WSL. And while she's on the pitch, Arsenal have only conceded 63. So she's literally outscored the opposition on her own by 16 goals. I haven't checked every single player, but I don't think there's going to be many, if any, players that can boast those numbers. Potentially her teammate Bunny Shaw, I think she might be the only one really, but that'll surely be the only one, if any. Some other transfers that have come into Man City this season, there's Reece Shimizu, who has come in from West Ham. She was really important for West Ham last season, played every game, the right back, 28 years old. Although it has been announced by City that she suffered a ACL injury at the Olympics, so she won't be available for potentially a large chunk, if not the whole season. She's not the only Japanese player that's come in. There's also Aoba Fujino, who's coming from Tokyo Verdy Belleza. She's a 20-year-old forward, and she is coming alongside Ayake Yamashita, who I'm quite intrigued to see how she gets on this season, because she's 28 years old, so she's pretty much in her prime. She's Japan's number one. She played all 4 games for Japan at the Olympics. She's won 6 Japanese league titles and 8 domestic cups. She was the Japanese League Player of the Season in the 2021 season, and she's been in the Team of the Season for 7 of the last 9 seasons. So she's not a bit part player. She's a main character type player, one that expects to be starting all the time, one that expects to be getting good minutes in good competitions. So when they've already got Kiara Keating, who was really good last season, posted some really good numbers. I think she had the highest post-shot XG in the league compared to her goals. So she, prevented the most goals, basically. XG prevented, same sort of stat. It'll be interesting to see how that's managed and what sort of promises have been made. They've both had minutes in pre-season, so we don't really know exactly what's going to go on there, but I think we can assume it's probably bad news for Sandy Bakaiva either way. I don't know if it's potentially, Keating is doing the WSL and Yamashita's doing the Champions League or what, but it's not uncommon for teams at that level to have 2 keepers. You think about Arsenal having Zinsberger and Van Domselaar. You think about Chelsea having Hampton and Musovic. It's a relatively normal thing, and, we'll see how Gareth Taylor manages it as we go forward. Someone else that's come into Man City this year that people haven't really made much of a fuss about, but I think it should be spoken about more, is Nomi Lazelle. She's come in from Bristol City, who obviously were relegated last season. She was one of the best performing players for defensive actions in the league last year. So, your clearances, your blocks, things like that. Her on-the-ball metrics, so, like passes completed and things like that, definitely needed improvement. There will be an element of the fact that she was at Bristol, a team at the lower end of the league, that will affect this because, they don't have much of the ball. I think they had the lowest possession in the league. So she had to be making clearances rather than making passes, and players might not be available as much. They might not get out of the press as well. So her numbers just from being in that system are going to be worse. But it's interesting that Man City pick her up, because Man City are a team that are the complete opposite. They play with the ball in possession all the time. They don't make that many clearances because they tend to play composed passes instead and play their way out of trouble. I haven't watched much of her in pre-season, but I imagine the reason they brought her in is because they believe that she can still fit into City's system, albeit maybe not straight away. They've obviously still got some really good defenders. They've got Alex Greenwood, who still got a few years left in her yet. They've got Alana Kennedy. They've got Alexandria, who can play in the middle as well. But she's been signed on a 4-year contract. She's someone that has already been involved in the Lionesses squad. So she's definitely got a lot of potential ahead of her. I'm not sure whether Man City is the team that I was expecting her to go to. But if they can get her on the ball metrics that bit better, they can get her pass completion good. They can ensure that her composure on the ball is really good. So she's able to make those passes and fits in with the system they've got. It might be perfect for her. The other player they brought in is Eva Netz from Reading. She's an 18-year-old goalkeeper who now gone on loan to Portsmouth. They also might have some youngsters that come through this season. There's Tarto Hanlon, who's a Ireland under-19s player. There's Gracie Pryor, who has signed her first pro contract. Poppy Pritchard looks like someone that might be moving into the first team this year. Obviously, they have a lot of forward players, so it's perhaps unsurprising that she's ended up moving out to Crystal Palace on loan. But that'll be a really good experience for her. And, there may well be a space in the squad in future years when she comes back. Another player who's not quite a new signing this year, but has been out for quite some time is Jill Roord. Her return is officially TBC, but she's back in training. Gareth Taylor said that she's very close to getting minutes. I don't think she's going to be quite ready for the Champions League fixtures that are on Wednesday, or potentially have already been played, depending on when you're listening to this. But I think with Man City only finishing second on goal difference and Jill Roord being such an important player before she was injured, I think if she'd have stayed fit, maybe even just for a few more games, she could have been the difference between Man City finishing second and winning the WSL for the first time in quite a few years. This squad is obviously still under the leadership of Gareth Taylor, which I think is quite a good omen. He seems like a really nice guy. He seems like he's doing a very good job. And I think the familiarity at the club is a really good thing. If you look at the other clubs in the top three, you've got Chelsea, who have not got that stability this season. They've obviously brought in Bon Pastor, who, it's an elite manager in for another elite manager, but it'll be interesting to see if that succession goes smoothly. And then the other team in the top three is Arsenal, who, depending on which Arsenal fans you speak to, they'll give different opinions about whether they think Jonas is the right person for the job. Gareth Taylor seems to be a man that has the backing of all Man City fans, which is, sort of a different outlook from the fans, and I think is a ode to how he manages the club and his personality and how much the players like him as well. Before I get on to my expectations for the season, we did have a question from Tom on Instagram, which was, do you think Man City will win the Champions League in the next 5 to 10 years? Now, Tom, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but I think you worded it in a way that would change my answer if one word was different, and that is the will. Do you think Man City will win the Champions League in the next 5 years, or 5 to 10 years? And do you think Man City could win the Champions League in the next 5 to 10 years? I think are two different answers. They definitely can do. They're on the right track. They're improving year on year. They are already an elite club. They've got really good backing from the club as a whole. Obviously, the men's side are doing very well, and they do put the money into the women's side. They prioritise with transfers. They prioritise with giving the women their own stadium, things like that. And also allowing the women to play at the men's stadium, for those bigger games. I think they're doing as much as they can do. Do I think they will win the Champions League in the next 5 to 10 years? Probably not. I think there's still teams like Barcelona. They still exist, and they are still, I think, the best team in Europe. And then in the same breath as Man City, you've obviously got Chelsea, probably actually that bit better, and Lyon. You've got PSG, you've got Bayern Munich, you've got Arsenal. There's so many teams in that mix at the moment. And I don't think in the next 5 to 10 years, I'm confident that they are going to be, in any one of those years, the best team. I wouldn't be surprised if they won it in the next 5 to 10 years, but I wouldn't say there's a 50% chance that they would or more. That's my opinion on it. I wouldn't be surprised if some people disagree, but do let me know. Just sort of at me on Twitter. Let me know what you think about that, because I'm quite intrigued to hear what people's opinions are. As I go on to my expectations for the year, obviously I said earlier on that they finished second on goal difference last year. This year, I think they're going to be easy top 3 pick. It'll be very close between Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City. I've toiled over this a bit to try and figure out who I think will win it, and I've made different decisions depending on which point in the last few weeks you've asked me. But yeah, I think there'll be a bit of a gap between them and who I think will be 4th in Man United. So they'll definitely be in the top 3. They'll definitely qualify for the Champions League again. And I've decided that I think Man City are my favourites for the title this year. I think with their consistency in coaching, And the fact that they were only beaten on goal difference last year, they've improved their squad. They've got a deeper, higher quality squad than they had last year. Yeah, I really wouldn't be surprised if they won the title. That being said, I think that will be the one that they focus on the most. I don't think they're going to win a domestic cup because they're going to be focusing on the league so much. Similar with the Champions League as well. I think there may be times where if they have to prioritize one or the other, Gareth Taylor might be putting out a slightly weaker side in a Champions League game or an FA Cup game if he knows that he's got a big WSL game coming up. So yeah, they're my predictions for the season for Man City. I think they're going to win the WSL, and that's about it. So yeah, that is my preview for Leicester and Manchester City this season. Thank you for joining me, listener. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have, please do follow wherever you get your podcast so that you don't miss an episode. There's quite a few coming out this week and a few recently, especially the season previews. If you want to go back and listen to them before the season starts, especially. If you enjoyed the episode, please give a 5-star review because we're still a new podcast. So give us some 5-star reviews and it really helps people find the podcast and help us to grow and, help that discussion around the WSL and women's football as a whole. A reminder that you can find me on X, Instagram and TikTok, all at Stattorino. X is where I put most of my content. So that's the place if you're only going to follow me on one. And join our Fantasy WSL League. There are over 100 of you in it already, which is fantastic. I'll put the code in the episode description so you can go in there, find it and pop it in your app. If you haven't made a team already, get on it. It's good fun. Thank you for being with me today, listener. I hope you've enjoyed the show and I will see you at the next one.